Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Um, we are going to just ask you to bear with us for 10 minutes because we've just received a press release and we just all need to sort of absorb that. So thank you. Yes, the one at 5:25. Thank you. Uh, if there's some, yes, John Todd has Councillor Codd. Good evening, everybody. Sorry about that. My name is Councillor Danish Said, the Chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and of the new Calling Committee. It's definitely gone well past 7, but I would like to welcome you all this evening. This is the second meeting of the new subcommittee, which has been created specifically to look at call-in requests relating to Cabinet decisions or Chief Officer decisions. I would like to welcome the members of the subcommittee who are sitting here this evening, other members who are in attendance, as well as council officers who will be assisting members throughout the evening. In addition, I would like to welcome members of the public who are watching this meeting at home or here in Hounslow House. I am aware that the subject of the call-in is very emotive. However, I would request everyone present at the meeting to allow the meeting to be conducted in a calm and peaceful way. Please do not interrupt or interject during the meeting. Please allow the subcommittee to consider the issues and conduct the meeting fairly without interruptions or disturbances. If the meeting is repeatedly interrupted by members of the public, you will be asked to leave. Now, the way the meeting will work will be that I, as chair, will be running the meeting and inviting people to speak. I will allow every member of the subcommittee who wishes to speak the opportunity to do so. Therefore, I would ask members to wait their turn and not interrupt people when they are talking or comment on the contributions of others except during their own statement. I wish to stress that I wish this to be a courteous, polite meeting, even where we do not agree on things. As part of this, may I remind all members that in accordance with the Constitution, when I speak during debate, any member speaking at the time must stop speaking, and so must all others. Further, if any member persistently disregards my ruling as chair by behaving improperly, offensively, or by disrupting business, I may move for them not to be heard any further. Do members understand my wish for courtesy throughout the evening? Thank you, Hanif. We also have a few other members who I'll be inviting to address the subcommittee tonight. These are Councillor Sam Hearn, who will be speaking to clarify the reasons for the call-in request, Councillor John Todd, who will be also speaking to clarify the reasons for the call-in request, and Councillor Hanif Khan and Jefferson as the relevant cabinet member and the chief officer decision maker. And they will explain why they think the chief officer decision was reasonable, and they will respond to the call-in. Yes, Ron.
Can I ask some clarification, please?
Yes.
I accept fully the directions you've given, but in the past, these meetings have often been interrupted by the very people that we are asking questions of, not through you, the chair. Can you guarantee that that will not be happening, that we will be allowed to talk without interruption from members or other officers whilst we're talking? Because
Yes.
often they go through you. And secondly, Chair, I just wanted to ask if we are asking a question, how long are we allowed to speak for, please?
5 minutes.
For the entire period?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
We're not actually taking questions from members of the audience. Sorry, this is a member-to-member led meeting. I'm afraid not, no. Sorry. This meeting has been called under the constitutional arrangements for call-in, which require a meeting of the subcommittee to take place within 7 days of the council receiving the notification of a valid call-in request. By agreement from all parties, this meeting is taking place beyond the 7-day window. The agenda was published in accordance with the usual access to information requirements. A call-in is a member-led process. 8 or more members express concerns about a cabinet decision or chief officer decision, and so a group of 5 members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, who are not party to the call-in request, will review it and come to a view on the call-in request and the appropriate response back to the cabinet. The terms of reference for this new subcommittee allow us to do the following. 1, consider call-in requests relating to cabinet decisions or chief officer decisions. 2, refer any recommendations for changes that we might decide back to the Cabinet. Or 3, we can refer the matter to Council if we consider the decision falls outside the Council's policy framework or budget. I would also like to remind members that the review of a call-in request should not in itself be adversarial in nature. The subcommittee is not the owner of the call-in request and so are not advocating on either behalf or against it. We are here to review it and the Chief Officer's decision. We are here to express our opinions on the merits or otherwise of the call-in and try to come to a collective view, or failing that, a majority view. I would also ask members to bear in mind throughout the meeting the need for overview and scrutiny members to act as a critical friend to the Cabinet. We are here to try to make it, and therefore the Council overall, make better decisions, and we must do that in the spirit of friendship. The procedure that we will be following tonight has been circulated to members of the subcommittee. It is based on the terms of reference for this subcommittee, the constitutional requirements for how committees operate, and the members' scrutiny handbook. I will explain it to everybody now, as this is still fairly new and is just our second meeting. The process tonight is a two-stage one. First, we will consider the decision and the reasons for the call-in request to see if we all agree with it, part of it, or none of it. Secondly, and depending on the outcome of the first stage, we will then move on to discuss what recommendations for changes, if any, we wish to refer back to the Cabinet to consider. We shall do this in the following way. We shall start the first stage by asking Councillor Hearn to speak for up to 5 minutes to introduce the call-in request and his reasons for it. I shall then ask Councillor Todd to speak for up to 5 minutes to give his reason for this call-in. I shall then ask Councillor Khan, as the relevant Cabinet member, also to speak for 5 minutes to explain why he thinks the original decision was reasonable and why the call-in should not be upheld in part or in full. I have said 5 minutes, but if you need another 5 minutes, that I will accept that. I will then ask members of the subcommittee to ask questions of clarification to the councillors. I will then ask each of the members of the subcommittee in turn to speak for up to 5 minutes on the first question, which is to see if we agree with all of it, part of it, or none of the call-in request. I will do this in the following order: Councillor Akanzada, Councillor Lal, Councillor Mishisho, Councillor Foote. I will then invite Councillor Foote as the Vice Chair briefly to sum up to see if we have any or partial or whole consensus. I will then ask him to propose a motion based on this, confirming if the subcommittee wishes to agree with the call-in request, part of the call-in request, and if so, which elements or none of the request. I will then seek a seconder for that motion, and the members of the subcommittee will vote on it. If the decision is not to agree with any part of the call-in request, we will move on to the next agenda item, as we will not be making any references to the Cabinet. That concludes the first stage. If we have decided that we agree with all or part of the call-in request, we will move to the second part of the process, which is to decide what we wish to recommend to the Cabinet. I intend to do this in a similar way, which is to ask each of the members of the subcommittee in turn to speak for up to 5 minutes with their views on what should be in those recommendations. I will do this in the same order as last time. I shall then again invite Councillor Foote as Vice Chair to sum up briefly if we have partial or whole consensus. I will then ask him to propose a motion based on this, confirming what the subcommittee wishes to refer to the Cabinet to consider. I will seek a seconder for that motion, and the members of the subcommittee will vote on it. And that's the process that we will be dealing with tonight with these requests. Right, so we can finally get started. I would just like to see if there are any apologies from anybody tonight. Right, everybody is present. Okay, and I am just confirming that we are quorum for this evening. So I, as Chair, along with my fellow councillors on the subcommittee, have to just tell you all, have been absolutely overwhelmed by the huge number of emails we have received in relation to the call-in. I apologise that all of us have not been able to respond to every email simply due to the sheer number of them. I mean, we've been receiving them up until just before we've come in, actually. I must emphasise that we have read all of their emails and will be considering the issues raised. Right, I would just like to see if there are any declarations of interest. Yes, Hanif. Oh, and Catherine. Councillor. Yes, Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to declare that I follow on the Facebook page of Hounslow Cycling, and also clarify that I'm not a member of the London Cycling Campaign. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dunn.
Thank you, Chair. I am a member of the London Cycling Campaign and its local chapter, Hounslow Cycling. I keep an open mind in all decisions that I make related to cycling and other... Sorry, you're not allowed to speak, and you're certainly not allowed to say that I'm saying rubbish.
Okay, can we all just keep calm?
Excuse me.
Okay, can we all just please try and keep calm?
Absolutely disgraceful. If you cannot stay quiet,
Councillor
you must
Dunn.
leave.
Councillor Dunn, can we just all start? Thank you. Have you finished? Thank you. We are now going to move on to agenda item 2, which is the main item on the agenda for this evening, the call-in request relating to the Chief Officer decision contained within the report COVID-19 Transport Response, Interim Review of Street Space Phases 1 and 2A, dated the 27th of August 2021. I will begin by reminding all members of the constitutional reasons on which a call-in request must be made. Inadequate consultation with stakeholders prior to the decision, the absence of adequate evidence on which to base the decision is contrary to the policy framework or contrary to or not wholly in accordance with the budget framework, the action is not proportionate to the desired outcome, a potential human rights challenge, insufficient consideration of legal and financial advice. May I ask all members to bear these in mind in the following discussion, as if any part of a call-in does not meet these criteria, you cannot support that element of it. I will start this evening, as I stated, by inviting Councillor Hearn to introduce the call-in request and clarify the reasons for submitting it. Councillor Hearn, the document is included in the agenda pack, so hopefully everybody's managed to have a read of it. Thank you, Councillor Hearn.
Thank you, Chair. Before I begin and before my time starts running, can I just have clarification on what the panel are considering this evening is not only the document that we called in, but also the new proposal that's arrived this evening by press release. Can I have confirmation that's what decision is going to be on?
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm going to be covering mainly general matters relating to the report itself, and I'll be incorporating in as much as I can from the briefing. While Councillor Todd will be talking specifically about matters affecting the residents of his ward, for me, the other side of the A316, but I'm sure he won't restrict himself to that. We're, of course, grateful that these changes have been proposed, put forward. Just really surprised that they come out at this time and really only available at the 11th hour. They will have a significant impact on some of the lives of residents in the ward and in both Chiswick Riverside and in Homefields. And they will obviously affect businesses, schools, service providers located in the area. There are many implications. These need to be considered carefully. As you will have seen from the issue of the original report, it stirred a great deal of interest and a great deal of response. I think you would understand why I'm going to suggest to you that this new 11th hour press release requires a similar amount of consideration. We are going to request of you that you consider another option, which you, I believe, are allowed to consider, and that is deferring making a decision on the report until a later meeting. It's based on a number of grounds. Obviously, as I've indicated, there are an awful lot of people not in the room who will not have seen this, who will only be hearing about it over the coming days. You do need the feedback from those people, and that feedback has not been obtained. Secondly, as the borough comes out of the COVID and the impacts of the lockdown, how can anyone accurately predict traffic usage that's going to emerge, and what the needs of local residents will be? How can we make permanent decisions, how can we make the permanent decisions which are included in here until we know what the future is going to be? I would argue very strongly that we do need to wait more time before we make permanent decisions. And this just requires some quiet reflection, and certainly not a very short review in this meeting. Local residents, many of you may not be aware of this, but local residents are submitting free formal complaints to the local government ombudsman, specifically about these so-called South Chiswick schemes. 2 are still with the local authority. 1 has been accepted by the local government ombudsman. How is it possible for the call-in panel to decide that the report in front of them, as amended, be implemented, final implementation, while these decisions are still outstanding? It would appear in a very poor light with a local government ombudsman if that was to happen. And finally, we all know that the government required the work to begin at pace on implementing changes. They were authorised to cut a few corners. But the lockdown has been lifted, and we need to return to normal decision making. And that should apply to these decisions. And there is good advice out there from the local government's ombudsman about the basis on which decisions are made and resources are allocated can, even under emergency conditions, should be open and transparent. And that's really all we're asking for here, that you should not be placed in a position of having to make a decision on something you have only recently been given with tonight. You have no opportunity to talk to officers or to anybody else. So please, can we just emphasize, we would like you to come to the decision that you need to defer a decision on, certainly on anything permanent. You may regard this as a technical point.
30 seconds left, Councillor Hearn.
My God. Okay. Let's just look at this, the schemes that have come forward and the changes that came forward the 28th, the changes that have now come forward tonight. We have a very complicated scheme, which people have great difficulty in understanding, hence the huge amount of fines that residents are incurring and friends of residents. We have an extremely complex scheme. The 28th report, those decisions just make life even more complicated. And what we've heard this evening, I've tried to absorb it, that makes it more complicated still. And can I have up on the screen? Can you please put the screen up? This is the area we're talking about. The blue is poor. This is TfL talking about public transport access. Oh, and the hatch bits are completely rubbish areas if you can't see the index. That is the ward where they're trying to impose these measures. There are more measures coming in, if you look at this list, than the rest of Chiswick put together, and I wouldn't be surprised the rest of Hounslow put together. We really need to consider any amendments very, very carefully, because what that screen is telling you is that the people who live in that area depend on motor vehicles, either their own or other people's motor vehicles, or they depend on transport, buses, and whatever. And yet these measures make life so much more difficult for people to move about and carry out their general business. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hearn. Councillor Todd, would you like to speak?
Be a pleasure. Thanks very much. Councillor John Todd, Homefield Ward. I endorse most of what Sam says, or Councillor Hearn. I would argue, Chair, that the press release indicates that the council has responded to those hundreds of people who've written in, and on that basis provides the evidence to the committee that there's a case to answer. Hundreds and hundreds of people. And I'm going to cite 3 quick emails. The sister in charge of the convent in Chiswick will not be able to deliver blood tests on time for patients to get to doctors. A carer writes in and saying she's going to give up her job. Classic examples how decent people have had their community wrecked. It's a very emotive term, it's wrecked, because they live on the wrong side of the 316. What has been proposed tonight is, to me, a creative concept. You need to remind yourself when you read the Chief Officer decision that the recommendation is to amend a school scheme, And school schemes are, quoting from our director, three are proposed to remove traffic from outside school gates at collection and drop-off times, improving safety and air quality whilst maintaining access to parents at all times. So we have tonight a document which changes Staveley Road. It's the red road. It's got the, God, I asked for maps you can see, but you need binoculars. But within that blue area, can you see the, go up a bit, there's a red line higher. There, that thick red line there, that's Staveley Road. When the school schemes first started, the school closed, the road closed between 8 and 9, and is now amended, was going to be amended to 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Now the scheme is going to be amended, according to today's press release, from 8 o'clock to 7 p.m. Now, how can you say those hours relate in any way to a school scheme? Secondly, with the scheme before us, the document we called in, people who lived in 2 certain CPZs will be allowed to drive through the street at 24/7. But they would drive through the road when the children were going to and from school. Now, can you work out that logic? You ban people on one side of the road, yet you allow people who live at the top of the map, for the sake of argument, to go through 24/7. And this new scheme allows the people who are going to give permits to do the same. Now, that's intellectually challenging to me. I suspect I may annoy some people in the Duke's Meadow by saying there's a risk to safety, balance that and getting permits. But what's wrong for abandoning these fanciful schemes and going back to the original concept of 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the afternoon? Let people go where they want. Just dealing briefly with a press release, if you turn on the back, colleagues, you'll see at the end of the first paragraphs, delivery vehicles will not be exempt. So just to remind you, in my submission, I talk about all the various shops and premises that are within the prohibited area. Busby's, a well-known chemist, used by dozens of people, 2 doctors, psychiatrists, churches, all other places that cause difficulty. And what's the benefit? There's no benefit at all. It's just a speculative scheme that the administration seek to achieve dubious aims. If you want me, I'll be specific if you want. But I'll just deal with one matter which I've raised before. That if I could ask members to look at paragraphs in your document, page 30 and 31. It's on page 12 of the Chief Officer decision. I think there is a potential breach of human rights or the Equalities Act. And if you just read, if you kindly read paragraph 30, and if you don't mind me summarising the points I wish to raise. A panel of people looked at the impact on the elderly, disabled and pregnant women on the basis they were less likely to be positioned to change their mode of travel to walking or cycling. I think that's a reasonable assumption if you're pregnant and whatever. However, it was considered that these disbenefits were outweighed by the overall positive benefits of the scheme. And here comes the price. Here comes the real quote of the night. Whilst this consequence is largely unavoidable, the council does offer free one-to-one cycle training. I mean, is this a spoof? Who did it go through? I mean, it's utter arrogance. And I got legal advice from the equalities officer. I got mitigation rather than a defence. On the same theme, equalities, no blue badge holder you'll see in the report elsewhere will get a permit. No, there's 64. And the council goes on to say it's very difficult, the admin will be torturous. How do you identify a blue badge holder? You might be pure theatre. But the report also says, which is contemptuous, that other boroughs do it. Other boroughs give permits. The GLA has a scheme for London. So you don't get a blue badge for being a dancer. You do that because you have serious medical impairment. You can hardly walk, some of these people. You see them, we help them. And the council should be helping them. What the governance officer says in the equalities response to me, she says, I accept greater clarity and accuracy would have been beneficial. Insufficient documents, as drafted, insufficiently documents the impact of elderly and pregnant maternity. In light of this, the EQA, that's the Equality Analysis Form, is going to be updated. A full assessment of these impacts had been undertaken by the Assistant Director, but unfortunately this was mistakenly omitted from the EQIA. Omitted. My final sentence on this is this. There's a wonderful grand document called Equalities Analysis Form, and it says, using my words, we'll make sure we look after the disabled, we'll look after people with blue badges, but when we write the report, we fudge it, we miss things out. I ask you to form with you. I want to come on to the report itself and give you some very strong quotes. With evidence, there's no evidence of improved air quality whatsoever. It's mentioned in the report. Paragraph 15 talks about it, but it says, in accordance with its Air Quality Action Plan, the Council publishes its annual status report in August 21, which shows since 2020 there's been a reduction in both fine particulate matter and nitrogen oxides, with levels of coarse particulate matter remaining steady. This is not true. The report provides no data whatsoever on air quality or particulate data since 2020. You're aware, we're all aware. When we come to data, we have the traffic from Hammersmith Bridge going through this scheme. We have two schools, Cavendish, one of the 50th polluted school in air terms, off that road. Off the A4, we have another school, I think it was mentioned by one of my colleagues here, where they've got a green wall. The council have no measuring equipment in that area. It's not for me to say that's misleading. All I'm just saying it's inaccurate. And these are benchmarks that people like us look at to see if it stands up. I'll just mention a few other things. The report talks about social distancing, and I remind you that that's no longer applicable. The council has no evidence of modal shift, no evidence of reduced air pollution, provides no evidence of reduced congestion. And Section 2B of the Constitution states the actions officers
1 minute remaining.
Okay, thank you. The actions must be proportionate to the desired outcome. This decision, this is the document that we're asked to endorse, is clearly not in view of the lack of evidence to support the objectives and overwhelming opposition registered in the consultation process. So it's in breach of the Constitution. A couple of little bullet points that adds to the argument that we all make mistakes, we all reduce purport. This is an 18-page document. This is for someone who just walked into a time bomb, came to Hounslow when all these schemes were coming in. But paragraph 47, to be fair, says, it's difficult to draw firm conclusions. Paragraph 48 says, the majority of feedback that's been received expresses both objection to the scheme and a clear desire for the schemes to be removed. We talked about air quality. Importantly, we go back to the one constant word.
Councillor Todd, your 10 minutes are up. If you could wind up, please.
I will do. Okay.
Thank you.
Evidence-based, as noted above, the decision is made despite the notice admitting there is inadequate or no evidence on the following issues. If I make one more sentence, we've been in discussion with both the assistant director and lead member over a number of occasions, and to the extent that I got emails last night at 1 o'clock. So the cooperation is appreciated. Thanks very much.
Councillor Hearn, you also had the option to have 10 minutes, but you didn't do the 10 minutes. If you wish to add something, you made... Yes, but that was for the 5 minutes, and so that was my mistake. If you would like another 5 minutes, you're more than welcome. You can sit down if you wish as well. You don't need to stand, whatever's comfortable.
More comfortable for me
Okay.
to stand at the moment. Right. Inadequate consultation with stakeholders prior to decision. I would accept this is an entirely verbal undertaking that we were given by officers, but we pointed out to him that the schemes, and it wasn't just this officer here, or to predecessors, that these schemes are very complicated, very complex, they interact with each other, they affect different people in different ways. We made the point that we needed not just to look at individual schemes affecting individual roads or a couple of streets. We needed to see the impact. We needed to consult on the impact of the whole thing. And Councillor Todd has alluded to that. We have not had a consultation that I've seen on how the whole scheme operates. So we've looked at it. We've had people talking about individual bits of schemes and whether they think they're good, whether they should. We haven't said, is this successful? And you've heard from Councillor Todd, there isn't actually any measurement of modal shift. There was nothing before the scheme, nothing after. Air quality, we don't have monitors in the ward. We have a damn great river which blows the air through. That's good. On the other side of the borough, on the other side of the ward, we have a motorway which blows bad air into us. These schemes are not going to affect either of those two main things. What we do know is that there has been some reduction in traffic, but one of the streets, as we predicted when the original scheme came in, because they blocked up one main road, Staveley Road, all the other traffic's going into Burlington Lane, and the traffic there has increased. What's wrong with the people in Burlington Lane? You know, so now we predicted that, so we said, well, you could block off the Burlington Lane. They blocked off Burlington Lane. You know, it just goes on, continually adjusting, but not consulting. These were all things that were told to officers. I agree, not Jefferson, but were told to, Officer Kwame. But this was all predictable. And if proper consultation had been held, which it wasn't, and that's why this needs to be deferred, because we need to consult. We need to hear how this affects people's lives. Not proportionate to desired outcome. I've said this. Chiswick has just got far more schemes than anybody else. It's a scheme which really suffers, as I demonstrated, with low traffic access, low access to public transport. And what are we doing? Each time we look at this, we don't say, well, we may have made some mistakes here. We just keep adjusting and making the thing more complicated. And it's very, very difficult to explain to people. Businesses running here I think there was a mention of Busby's, a chemist which affects people all across this area and beyond and delivers in outside. Sorry, I know I'm running up against time. Restaurants, pubs along the river. How are people meant to get to them? And we've got some wonderful new CPZ controls, which mean they can't park there anyway because of the football stadium. I mean, all of this just seems to smack of a council that really doesn't want the area to succeed, that the small businesses aren't meant to thrive, that Busby's isn't meant to serve the people who are sick and need their NHS prescriptions. It seems if you're living in the area, you are being attacked, not assisted, not given a better, more livable neighbourhood. So you know what our preference would be tonight, but can I ask you, if you're not going to defer a decision, and I've given you lots of good reasons why you should, can you please take this report to Cabinet so the Cabinet can actually make this decision? These decisions, when you look in there in the sections, they're all across the borough. They're not just Chiswick, and this should not be left to one chief officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hearn. Councillor Khan, would you like to give your response, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. So would you like me to give my response to both of the presentations?
Yes.
Yeah. So if I first begin with what Councillor Hearn has said, I'd just like to first of all clarify when Councillor Hearn refers to the 11th hour, and he explained that quite a lot, said, to me, the 11th hour basically means like right now, for example. So we had a discussion with Councillor Hearn and Councillor Todd on Monday. So they were aware of the decisions that we were considering. So when he refers to the 11th hour, I don't believe it is the 11th hour. So there's the issue there with the 11th hour. And also when Councillor Hearn says that the London Borough of Hounslow is attacking its residents, I'm not sure where that comes from, because when we look at during the pandemic, where we had 2,500 people shielding, and we were responding to their needs instantly, I don't believe that they were being attacked in any way, nor do I believe the work that was being done at Brentford with the hub meant that we were attacking our residents. I mean, this borough has been well recognised for the way it has worked during the pandemic and the way it's treated its residents overall. So I'm really confused with those comments. And also, these when Councillor Hearn talks about consultation, and then he quite eloquently and adequately explained that decisions were made and then they were updated, and then another decision was made and then it was updated, in itself tells you that we as a council and my team were listening and making changes and listening and implementing what was requested. So again, I'm always confused with when he said there's been no consultation. And also, if Councillor Hearn is referring to Jefferson's predecessor, it's Mark Frost is the name I think you were looking for. And
Andrew Burton.
Yeah, Andrew Burton came after Mark Frost, correct? So Mark Frost, Andrew Burton, and then along came our permanent person, which was Jefferson. So through that time, we haven't stopped speaking to our residents. We haven't stopped working on our schemes. But today we are referring to the scheme that's related to Grove Park. And again, this scheme was put in place as a result of the feedback that we had received. And then today, again, we have listened and we have made changes and updated to the scheme that the experimental traffic scheme. So on that side of we're not listening, we're not consulting, we are attacking our residents, kind of hurts me when you say things like that. And I know you laugh because and I'm surprised you laugh because I have responded to thousands of emails, sometimes written, not cut and pasted, in which I receive many of similar emails, but actually I try and write to them. And I have actually gone and met residents as well, and I have spoken to them as well. And I have not been hiding away. And it's been difficult, but I do feel, because we have made an effort. We're not perfect. We listen to our residents, and we want to make a change. And so there's on those issues, and then where Councillor Hearn again refers to a mode shift, I can assure you, and then also when Councillor Todd mentioned about one-to-one cycling, and many of our residents here found that quite funny, which was okay. I can understand the way it gets put, but actually, when you understand that cycling and segregated cycle lanes, etc., the biggest fear that people have is actually feeling safe on the road. And many of the people who are now taking up cycling probably haven't cycled for nearly 40 years. And I know this because when we do the scheme, which is known as the all ability cycling, where we allow people who have lost complete confidence, and maybe who are also from our vulnerable community, and those who have restrictions, who come to Inner Park, and they come with their parents and they learn to cycle in a safe place, have written to me as to how much they have enjoyed that. So again, so when you make comments about one-to-one cycling, there is so much activity that goes on, and we've been recognized for the work that goes on. So this issue about modal shifts, about people actually not taking to the cycles, is again, I would disagree with. So again, that needs clarification. And we know that during the pandemic, two things happened. And people went to their cars because they didn't feel safe, and people found alternative methods of travel, and cycling was one of them. So cycling did increase in our borough, and we responded to that by creating many pop-up cycle lanes and making it safe, and allowing our residents to be able to feel safe on the road. Now, these measures, they're known, as you're aware, as experimental traffic orders. So during the time when our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, said you need to implement these measures, we did, and we did it at a pace, and we were recognized for our activities and what we did. And so they're known as experimental traffic orders, and that's when you learn. Because, as my esteemed colleagues have said, these are extremely complicated schemes. The best way for anybody to learn a complex system is to put it in as a traffic measure. That's the advice that we received from the Secretary of State for Transport, Grant Shapps, and then further subsequent
Councillor Khan, 1 minute, please.
Okay, so I'll leave. There are many more comments I'll say, but I just wanted to talk a few points on Councillor Todd's comments as well, where he talks about we have no regard to our residents who are vulnerable, who require blue badges. But actually, the blue badge, as we all know, do not always refer to the vehicle, because you can transfer the blue badge to another vehicle. It's not always related to that. So it's the blue badge that's the important thing. So we're helping our residents in that situation. And when we talk about the air quality, Councillor Todd, we do know that the overall air quality has increased. Now, I know I've only got a few moments left, but what I would say is that if I was having this conversation from 10 years today, in the future, you will be looking back at me saying, why did you not do this earlier? What my children need a place to be able to walk, cycle in a safe place.
Khan.
I'll end there. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're now going to move to questions, and this is to the subcommittee here. Can I just ask you all to ensure that your questions relate specifically to the call-in report? which is the matter we are considering this evening. So please explain which part of the call-in you are asking your questions about when you ask. And these are questions of clarification on what councillors Hearn, Todd and Khan have said. I will ask Javid Akhundzada, please. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, through you, first of all, I'm really disappointed that the changes which have been announced were just provided us just before the meeting, so which have actually changed the scope of this call-in, to be very honest. The other thing which I will ask, because both of these call-in are very connected to each other, and my question are very generic, so it's related to both of them. First of all, if I just refer to the conclusion and the data which they are referring to about the air quality and the traffic flow and all that, most of this data was during the pandemic. And as far as I am aware that the consultation is still going on, is there any data available to after the pandemic which we can relate to or compare to the data which was collected during the pandemic? So which will give us an idea that whether there is any impact on air quality or the traffic flow in these areas. And as the other issue I was just referring to was, which Councillor Todd have just touched on, the equality one. It was mentioned in the report that it may affect the people with disability and all that stuff, but there was no, no reason was given that how it was justified. They were just mentioned the concerns, but there is no referral to that how it was addressed. That's it for the time being. I think maybe later on, if I need any clarification, I will.
Is that quite, is that for Councillor Khan that you're looking for an answer, please? Councillor Khan or Jefferson?
So I can just, so thank you very much. And I do understand that the new information that you've received may change the process for today. But we felt that it was important that because the interest was so great here, that we should share this information with you. We actually were planning to maybe take it in advisement from yourself and then react, but that was the way it all just kind of came about, and especially after our meeting that we had on Monday with Councillor Hearn and Councillor Todd, we felt that possibly it might make sense to bring it sooner. In terms of the data that's been collected for the air pollution and what our future plan is, I can only draw your attention, and I'll let Jefferson follow on from my answer, is that when the pandemic was at its height and people were in their first lockdown, we could feel very evidently that the air pollution was less and the air was much cleaner, and it was clear, and many reports were coming out and people were saying only if this could remain that way. But that's our challenge as a borough, that we want to improve the air quality. And our plan to do that is such with the monitoring ones that we have. So in terms of the plan and what we said, and I did say in my opening statement that overall the air quality has improved, but I'll let Jefferson explain the exact process that we're going through and have been going through. Thanks, Jefferson.
Thanks, Councillor Khan. Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I will address Councillor Akhundzada's question around the suddenness or lateness of the press release. Apologies, we had this discussion with Councillors Hearn and Todd on Monday, and the agreement at that point was to keep it confidential, and I was hoping that there will be a statement perhaps the following day or so. Unfortunately, that didn't quite materialize, and we felt that coming in, given the level of correspondence we were receiving that it probably made sense to release it at some point today in advance of this meeting, so that people were aware. And also, my team are dealing with a significant level of inquiries, and it might take us quite a few weeks to be able to address all of them. So that was the point of that. To the question about air quality, there's always a challenge, and I think it's worth noting that the pandemic is not yet over. Whilst we may have withdrawn or released some of the lockdown restrictions, the pandemic is still going on. The challenge for us, whilst we have some air quality data that shows, in March there was an air quality data that was released which showed marginal improvements. The air quality data in August, which is the Council's annual status report, this shows some improvement in air quality. Now, I would expect anyone who has an interest in air quality, who's genuinely interested in air quality, would have read that. It's been on the Council's website for the past month. Although the caveat in that is that it's not clear to what extent you can attribute those air quality improvements to the street space measures. There's a question as to whether those improvements are perhaps attributable to the pandemic. Time will tell. We don't know that at this point in time. Unfortunately, we may have to wait a little while longer before we know that for certain. But based on data we have available at the moment, there has been an improvement.
Thank you.
Chair, could I ask Catherine to also respond as well?
Chair,
Yes. Excuse me, would you mind sitting down? Thank you. Okay, that's fine. Thank you for attending. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Good evening.
Chair, can I just ask my last question from Councillor Sam Hearn? Yeah, thank you. In his recommendation, he referred to the decision Council, if the subcommittee believes is to be contrary to the policy framework or budget framework. He didn't put any, if you can just explain that why you are saying, because I don't think so there is any budget framework involved in this project. So if you can just explain.
Councillor, in my call in, I didn't call in on those grounds. As you can see, the time to deliver is very short. We've considered it. I mean, most of the funding that we can see that's visible in the accounts comes from TfL to the borough. So there's no impact on our budget directly. So I would say that. I mean, discussed this in other fora, but I thought I would focus on other areas for the call-in, which I think are pretty powerful.
Thank you. Councillor Lal.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd like also to take the opportunity to thank all the members of the public who contact me directly, and I know they've contacted members of the scrutiny panel as well. So I do thank them for reaching out to me and letting me know their concerns. I've listened very carefully to Councillor Hearn and Councillor Todd, and also Councillor Hanif Khan, and there's still a lot of questions to be asked. And this 11th hour document has muddled the water somewhat, as we won't fully understand the implications of that to the entire scheme. And that's going to complicate things somewhat. And I think we're going to have to come to some kind of a decision-making process on how we're going to move forward with that. I have a number of questions, and I'll kick off with the question regarding air quality, because it's already been discussed. In the report, there are several references made to air quality and the measuring of air quality. And it does appear to me from the answers that I've heard so far that there really hasn't been subjective data available to make a really good decision on whether the air quality has improved or got worse. Yeah, from the report, that's the inference that I get. And in terms of my question, are there any sites, air quality monitoring sites, near Cavendish Primary School, the Alms House, the convent and the nursing home, Chiswick School, and also, Councillor Hanif Khan, you mentioned that there was a general feel that the air quality has got better. Again, I think that was probably an inappropriate use of describing the air quality. I'm really looking for subjective. So if I can answer those questions, and I'll follow with some other questions.
Thank you. Councillor Khan?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Councillor Lal. So, yeah, good answer. So, yeah, when I was referring to the air quality, it was when I made it clear it was during the first lockdown, and it was reports on the news. Everybody was saying it, so it was that is what I was referring to. Okay, what I'll do, I'll ask Jefferson to answer your specific questions, and then I'll ask Catherine as the climate change lead to come in afterwards. Thank you.
Chair, point of just clarification.
Yes.
Why is Councillor Catherine Dunn on this panel where we are actually asking Hanif Khan,
Why are you
lead
asking
member?
Hanif Khan the questions?
We knew she was coming, so
Yeah. Is this supposed to be a member to
It
lead
is.
member? And I just need Councillor Dunn, or you can explain why she's on this particular section, because this is supposed to be transport questions.
okay. Councillor Khan?
So throughout the whole process, as Councillor Mashisha knows, every single call in, from the first one, we have had Councillor Dunn, and we have had Councillor Lambert and myself. And because of the street space program that not just refers to the traffic schemes, but refers to our network highways and refers to the climate change. So therefore, the work of my other two colleagues is imperative to the work that I do with street space. So I can't see that there was any other difference to what, and you were aware of Catherine's arrival today. So
It is actually in the gift of the chair as well, Councillor Mashisha. So, okay, sorry. Were you wanting to answer to Councillor Lal?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Lau, I suppose the straightforward answer is that due to the speed at which these schemes were introduced in 2020, it simply was not possible to have air quality monitoring, to have that pre-data prior to the implementation of these schemes. That in itself made it very difficult for us to gather scheme-specific data. So whilst we have borough-wide or town-wide data based on extrapolation, based on where we have air quality monitoring stations, it's very, very difficult to have scheme-specific data or to be able to measure improvement if you don't actually have pre-data. We don't just simply install air quality monitoring stations on every road. That's simply not possible. In an ideal situation, would have been for us to have time to install air quality monitoring units, monitor the data for a period of time prior to the installation of the implementation of the schemes. Unfortunately, the speed at which they were introduced meant that wasn't possible. So basically, hence your reference to the report not being very specific on specific data for specific schemes. That's simply not possible. How do we correct that is probably the question. The two measures we're planning to introduce now and henceforth on any other schemes that we introduce, we intend to ensure that we have air quality monitoring units prior to the implementation of those schemes. For example, the two schemes in Grove Park, the Burlington Lane scheme, as well as Staveley Road, we intend to implement air quality monitoring units of some sort over the period of time probably a month prior to the implementation of the scheme. So we actually have some pre-data against which you can benchmark any data we receive once the scheme is in place. So yeah, we're going to correct that, because now we can't do that. Unfortunately, in May, when these schemes were introduced, we simply didn't have the luxury of time to be able to do that.
Okay, excuse me, please. I've just asked all of you at the beginning if you wouldn't mind interrupting. Thank you.
Can I?
Sorry, Chair, I was going to ask Catherine to also add.
Catherine, yeah, please, Councillor Dunn.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so on the to add to what Jefferson said on the air quality data, of course we would like to collect data, and we do collect data, and we are making steps, and we've put money in to be able to collect more data from more sites. But I think it's important that we mustn't get bogged down in data collection. So this isn't research, this is implementation. And I work in research, and implementation is not research. But also research involving this type of measure is not, it's a complex system, which means it's not something where you can do one thing, make one change, like you probably were taught in science classes at school. You change one thing at a time and then you see the outcome. You can't do that in complex systems, because everything all interacts together. And especially when you're trying to address lots of things at once and you're doing work in the real world rather than in a science lab. It's not as simple as making one change and seeing the outcome. You've got all sorts of things happening all the time, and you don't know what is contributing to the changes that you see. So as Jefferson said, you can't necessarily attribute changes you do see to any one particular thing. The point is, we don't have time to conduct lengthy experiments. We are in an emergency. We have people dying because of poor air quality in the capital. We have a climate emergency where we desperately need to reduce our carbon emissions. And we've got the COP26 conference coming up in a couple of months' time, where we're going to say to the world that we are going to do everything we can to reduce our carbon emissions. And we have, we haven't just had a COVID pandemic of infectious diseases. We have a public health pandemic in this country of poor health, of people with diabetes, with heart disease, and lots of diseases relating to a lack of physical activity. So there are so many things that we're trying to address with these changes. And we know because research has been carried out what we need to do. We need to have more people walking and cycling, fewer people driving, fewer cars on the roads spewing out emissions. And these measures are all a part of that to try and get us towards that place. So when you make these changes, you have to look at lots of different things, but what you have to look at is the overall effect. And the overall effect that we want to see is fewer cars on the roads and more people walking and cycling. And that doesn't happen overnight. That takes time. But we know that it does happen in places where measures like this have been put in. You also have to look at the effect on individuals and whether any one or group of individuals are being either discriminated against or unduly, inconvenienced. But inconvenience by itself, it has to be a big inconvenience. And I don't believe in this scheme that we are inconveniencing people that much. We are talking about car journeys that will take a few minutes longer.
Okay, thank you.
And the overall, so some people, yes, will drive longer, and people have said to me, well, I'm driving for longer, doesn't that mean more pollution? Yes, from that journey, but when you look at the overall effect, over time, if you have fewer people driving, more people walking that 20-minute journey rather than driving for the 4-minute journey. And I have had a lot of people writing to me to tell me that they won't be able to do their 4-minute car journey. So I think overall it's the right decision, and we have to take into account all of these things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dunn. Councillor Lal, you have another question.
Yes, Chair. Thank you very much for your response. And quite clearly, in hindsight, things would have been done differently had we had the opportunity to do before and after air quality tests, and particularly at some of these locations that I've mentioned. So that's something to see as we go forward. I think, although I welcome the responses from the cabinet members and the officer, I think we need to sort of make them a little bit quicker and sharper, because otherwise we're not going to get through this meeting. So my next question is really, really simple. In the document, there's a reference to it, and Councillor Todd made a reference to it. So what I would like to know is, what was the decision-making process behind extending the closing times on Staveley Road? And it's on page 16 of this report. And is it true that none of the local councillors were consulted or informed of the new measures? The reason I ask this question is that clearly there have been meetings with Councillor Todd just prior to this meeting. So there's consultation going on. But within context to this particular one, was there any consultation with local councillors?
Is that Jefferson going to answer, or Councillor Khan? Okay. I beg your pardon?
I said you can see a theme. So it's, Councillor, it depends how you also define consultation as well, because, and at what stage, and who needs to be also consulted at what stage, because when a decision is made through cabinet, and then there is a procedure in terms of who then needs to then follow through in that process, and then what decisions are made. So in terms of before a final decision is done, obviously you need to talk to your ward councillors and you need to consult with them. But once that consultation is done, the actual decision and the way it's implemented, it does not have a requirement for the finer detail of that to be consulted. So I'll get clarification from Jefferson to explain that further, but that's how I would understand it. Over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Thank you, Chair. I think it's worth pointing out at this point, and thank you for the question, because it really needs to be corrected. Certainly the views that seems to be held by many in relation to how the decision is made. The process for making a decision in relation to interim reviews or final reviews is clearly set out in the cabinet paper that was approved in October 2020. And it states quite clearly, and I'll read it out just for clarity. To ensure an appropriate robustness of analysis, due diligence of the impact of each street-based scheme against the above criteria will be undertaken by an independent consultant at the interim and again at final review stage. The report will then be made available to officers to review and provide comment on, and also further circulated to ward councillors for input. The final report, incorporating all comments and empirical data and relevant air quality impact assessments and environmental assessments, will in turn be presented to the council's lead member and chief officer to inform decisions on the determination of the individual schemes. So when people say councillors were not consulted, that's demonstrably inaccurate, because I can show you on the 2nd to the 6th of October, between 2nd and 6th of October, we had 6 meetings. 3 of those meetings were councillor briefings, which is in compliance, in adherence to what is stated in the process, which is that the report should be circulated to members for their input. On these 3 days, we had lead member briefings on the 2nd, councillor briefings on the 3rd, and councillor briefings again on the 4th. At this point, the data, the report, the traffic analysis, which is about nearly 60, 70 pages, was condensed into a number of slides highlighting the key points around the analysis. The data was presented to members to see the outcome of traffic analysis and findings of traffic analysis. And also members had an opportunity to interact, ask questions of both myself as well as our independent consultants. So when people say councillors were not consulted, that's manifestly inaccurate because they were informed of the traffic analysis. The decision subsequently is a decision, as stated quite clearly in the process, for the lead member and the chief officer. That is the process. People might not like it, but that is the process approved by cabinet. So in relation to councillors not being consulted, that's just, I think I've provided enough evidence that that's just not accurate. In relation to the two new measures we're now introducing, as we've discussed earlier, we had meetings with the councillors in question to discuss some of our plans. So this wasn't a surprise. We discussed this as far back as Monday.
Thank you.
Chair.
Yes. Sorry, I'm sorry, Councillor Hearn. What do you want to say? Go ahead, please.
We had a briefing, the first time we knew anything about it, Councillor Todd and I. A lot of implications. We had questions, but it was a briefing rather than a consultation. And both Councillor Todd and I were under the belief that this was not for us to talk to other people about. In fact, both of us welcomed the opportunity to be able to talk to each other, discuss our own feelings. We found that we had misunderstood or we disagreed on what we were being told. Councillor Todd in particular has gone back for clarification. So that's the nature of this. And the publication of this and making it a public document is, as I believe Councillor Lyle has picked up, it is the 11th hour. That's when it becomes a public document available for discussion. And it's really unfair to bring it to this committee and ask them to make on a decision. And I will pick up, I mean, Jefferson, you're normally very accurate, but when you talk about two major changes, we had to discuss in the briefing, I think Councillor Todd had left by that point, but what is happening with Strand on the Green, which is meant to have an automatic number plate recognition scheme installed, and it's not going to be implemented in anything like the way, and this committee is going to be completely unaware of it, but it's in this document that it's going to be finalised. But that's not in the document, is it? You're not going to implement that camera scheme.
That is an operational decision. Sorry, Chair.
Sorry, no, I was just going to thank Councillor Hearn for his clarification there and then ask you to respond.
Okay, I think the scheme Councillor Hearn is referring to is a scheme that was initially intended to be enforced by camera. Based on data we've gathered over the course of the last 1 year, we have seen that compliance is very good. Traffic levels, and I will bring up a slide to show that later, on that particular road has dropped quite significantly. Now, we don't simply put in place cameras just for the sake of it. Cameras are there for enforcement. And if compliance is good, we don't tend to implement cameras. So, for example, there are a number of other schemes where we have fixed cameras in place. And that's because data shows us and level of fines being issued shows us that compliance isn't very good. In this particular scheme, we've looked at the data and we've seen that compliance is very good. Therefore, there's no need to have a fixed camera in place. That's an operational decision.
Councillor Hearn, and then Councillor Todd, and then Councillor Mishisha, we're coming to you.
Very quickly, my point is that in none of the reports that are in front of you, panel, is that described. And for many of the people in this room, that's quite an important change. It's a very important change.
Thank you, Councillor Todd.
Yeah, thank you. I'm reluctant to intervene, but can I ask, Councillor Lau asked a very fair question. Could I ask you to look at page 41 of the bundle, please? It's a document issued by, as I understand it, the Traffic Department, and about 2 inches down, there's mention of the engagement with ward councillors. I'm going to be very brief, Councillor Lau, and I do appreciate a question. I must ensure accuracy in these hearings. Neither I or any other ward member or anyone who lives in the Duke's Meadow area has ever heard of this proposed scheme before it was published on the 27th of August 21. That's an unambiguous statement. I could get you a petition tomorrow with 1,000 people. No information at all. So on that basis, I have not been engaged, informed, or advised. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Councillor Lal, I understand this is your last question, and thank.
Okay, Chair. I did want to touch on the consultation, but I'm going to leave that to other members should they wish to talk about it, because I've already made a conclusion on that one. But again, I'm referring to what's in this document and the choice of words. So I'm not picking on him. I'm just trying to get clarification on the choice of wording that was used. And this one is actually a question for the officer. It's on page 23, and it's bullet point D. Yeah, and the report states that an informal review can be taken by the chief officer. Given the magnitude, Chair, and the impact that this ETO has had on residents, I'd like to know what is meant by an informal review.
So, Councillor Lyle, what page number?
Page 23. Sorry, it's just where the bullet point 6 is, just above that, there's a paragraph. Informal reviews to be taken. Page 23. Just above point number 6 is a paragraph in which it says informal reviews. What is an informal review?
Councillor Lau, to take your question, that should say interim review, so that's an admin error.
Sorry, what was that, Jefferson? I didn't understand.
So it says informal review. It should say interim review. Yeah. There are two review. No, so prior to, once a scheme is implemented, there are normally two reviews: the interim review and then the final review.
Temporary.
Yeah. So when a scheme is implemented, we do an interim review.
Yeah.
And then a final review. Generally. That's not what it says in here.
So all schemes after 6 months go through a review. If we should change the scheme, yeah.
Yes, it says informal. Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's a typographical error. It should say interim, is what it should say.
Sure, I accept that. But
Apologies.
the word should be interim.
It should be interim.
Is that okay, Councillor
Okay,
Lal?
Chair, we'll just leave
Yep.
that one there, and
Yep,
because
of
it was
course.
quite concise,
Yep.
can I just flag up again for the officer to respond on page 33 under the conclusions of the report. Yeah, so under the conclusions, page 33, bullet point 47.
Mhm.
And again, choice of words, Chair. It says in the opening line, whilst it is difficult to draw firm conclusions. What do the cabinet members or the officer think that means?
In that context, firm conclusions means exactly that. Being absolutely certain of the conclusion before you draw a conclusion, absolutely certain of the fact. In this case, the following statement does say that it will be reasonable to conclude. That's a reasonable conclusion, not one that's simply based on our own judgment. So that's a conclusion based on judgment as opposed to absolute facts.
So it's not based on absolute fact.
It's based on a judgment.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Mishisho.
Thank you so much. I'm just reading what Councillor Lau was referring to, and So Chair, if you don't mind, I'm just going to ask some questions and hopefully allow members to respond.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If that's an error or a clerical error, I'm asking the lead member, which errors on these schemes do you regret the most?
So, Chair, that's question 1, yes? So you've got 2 more to go. Okay.
He's got 5 minutes in total.
But you have, okay, so you have more than 2. Yeah,
Perhaps quick question, quick answer.
yeah. So in terms of which scheme, I think every scheme has merits. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. I'll move on to, okay. So based on today's last 11th hour announcement, just looking at some of the schemes on the map there in Chiswick and just looking beyond at Chiswick Riverside, why would the Park Road and Staveley Road, Harvard Hill barrier, and also and why would that barrier still be an important part of this scheme if you have different alternatives for the Grove Park area? Why is Staveley Road and Harvard Hill barriers still remaining for that? And I want to ask that question actually first to the members presenting the call-in first, and then I'll hopefully go to Hanif.
As the
Councillor
ward
Hunt,
councillor, I'll
yes.
take that
Fine.
question. Thank you. At the briefing, and then an immediate initial look at what we're being shown, that was a question which I asked. By blocking off Burlington Lane and the other changes, well, what's the point of the diagonal barrier? And you'll see in your papers that this scheme, which is now Jefferson countered by telling me, sorry, do you mind me calling you Jefferson? Sorry. Jefferson countered by saying it would be better to wait and see what the impact of the new changes, these 11th hour changes, would be before they removed the barrier. And he thought that in the evening there would be a rush hour effect. People, for us, the evening rush hour is north-south, and that people might be tempted to come down Sutton Court Road, and if there was no barrier, no diagonal barrier, they might be tempted to use the road. But I do put it to you, you are being asked to make that scheme permanent today, whereas the tenor of Jefferson's response to me is, well, yeah, I take your point. It does seem there is an argument here for removing that scheme because it's no longer needed, but we'll just leave it in there just to see what happens. And that's really where we are. You're being asked to make something permanent, which the officer off the record, perhaps, but admitted to me, well, you know, the case isn't anywhere near as strong when you've made those new blockages.
Thank you. You want to ask that to Councillor Hanif Khan now or to Jefferson? Thank you.
Sorry, Harvard Hill, of course, the same thing applies. It would everybody else in the ward can go to the nearest exit from their area, but Harvard Hill they can't. And by leaving it in, you're just discriminating against those people who live in that area. They cannot quickly escape their area. Going back to Councillor Dunn, they have to make, yeah, maybe it's a 4-minute detour, but that's every day. Every day they go to work, they've got to go down residential streets, which they wouldn't have to do before the blockage.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be grateful if the AV guys could put up the traffic analysis slides, please. The most recent one I just sent you, if you could. Is another one? No. Okay. No need to you have. That's fine. That's fine. If you do find it, then let me know. Thanks. In response to the question Councillor Mushiso asks, that barrier is absolutely critical because prior to the installation of the barrier, there were somewhere in the region of 8,000 vehicles driving through that area. The reduction has been remarkable. I think we have the highest reduction in vehicle flows on Staveley Road alone. Now,
Excuse me,
Yes.
I've asked you all not to interrupt, please. Thank you.
So if the question is why is it still there? Well, it is still there because the measures we have on Staveley Road, where it meets the 8316, it's not a 24-hour restriction. It's an 8 to 7 restriction, Monday to Saturday. So therefore, evenings and Sundays, without that barrier in place, there will be cut-through traffic going through it. It's obvious. It runs all the way from the A316 and takes you through to the A4. So obviously, it's a very attractive route for cut-through drivers. So if we don't have the barrier in place in the evenings and Sunday on a Sunday, there will be, we expect there will be a high increase of traffic. It has worked, and therefore there's no need to reverse it.
Please.
Thank you,
Thank
Chair.
you.
I hope my fellow panel members make note of that response. The second response is perhaps more geared towards what Councillor Lau asked about air quality. And those 8,000 vehicles that you've said are no longer at
Can we
Staveley.
confirm that figure? I recognise the figure from Hartington Road. I'm not sure I recognise it from Staveley Road. I think it was.
Are you able to do so?
8,000, you say?
Yes, I believe it's there about 8,000.
Yeah. So where, I wonder, this is perhaps a question for the panel to consider, where are those 8,000 vehicles now moved to? Because when you're talking about air quality, we have to remember that Hammersmith Bridge is also closed. So I want to direct the first question here to Councillor Todd. If you can explain if in your brief meeting or private meetings that you had with the lead member, whether that was something that was discussed about the diversion of traffic. For example, I quote here one cabinet member saying that access to the Grove Park area will be possible via the A4. This will take a few minutes longer if they choose to drive. Did you have that conversation with the lead member, and what conclusions did you make, please?
Councillor Todd.
I don't think that figured in our conversation. It didn't figure in my conversation. The quote you cited, it was from a member of the public who had received email from Councillor Dunn. Sorry, I can't help any further. I mean, it certainly wasn't discussed with the officer or Hanif.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Councillor Mashisha.
Yeah, and then my final question is to do with the restrictions. So let's say an elderly or a disabled lady or gentleman that lives in one of the areas in Grove Park that the restrictions are affecting. They don't have a car, and they are obviously wanting to cycle, perhaps, but they need to get an Uber or a taxi across to another part of town. What would you say to the Uber drivers who refuse to access those roads because they know that they'll be fined as a result?
Who's going to take that, Jefferson? Okay,
Can
thank
I
you.
just say one-
And Councillor Khan, yeah.
In terms of the schemes, each scheme is slightly different. So can you just be more specific?
Yeah, so if an Uber driver would not know what scheme is where and what's working, so they'll be completely confused. And not
Sure,
just
there's
Uber
signs,
drivers. Hang on a
so
second.
there are
Let me
signs.
finish. It's not just an Uber driver I'm referring to. If you can perhaps, and I want to open this up to all the other members here, the other people on the panel here to answer. It's also relatives who are visiting their elderly relatives there for the first time. How would they know which road to avoid, which scheme is working in which part of Chiswick, which scheme isn't working in this part of Chiswick? Are we sure that those same people visiting their grandparents or parents or loved ones, that they will be going back home knowing that they've got a 70, 80, 100, 50, 400 pound fines in their bonnet before they even get home? But perhaps a 20 pound voucher would ease their but I'll let you answer that.
Okay, I will let Jefferson answer, but I don't know why you
No,
keep
Chair,
bringing
sorry,
up.
this is a member to member. I want to
I-
ask you, you're
fine.
the decision maker, you're the
Fine.
political
It
decision
was a
maker.
chief officer
I'm asking
decision,
you.
actually. You
So
don't
I'm
even know
asking
what
you.
you're calling
So-
in.
Okay, can we just stop that right now, please?
Yeah.
Who's going to answer? Is it
I-
going to be
I'm gonna
Councillor
answer.
Khan?
We're all going to answer.
Okay,
So
thank you.
I just again surprised you bring up the £20 voucher scheme. You know how fantastic of a success it is, and you've used it to have a dig. And I just, for those people who have found it such a great value to them, you're being unfair to them. So again, I thought you shouldn't have had that dig personally. Okay.
Personally, you should answer my question.
Do you wanna, I'll start. So actually, you need to ask a question again, because to be honest, that £20 scheme has just totally thrown me.
Okay, can
So
we
it's all
just?
about access, right? Because
Sorry.
everyone has access to
I was
to their
just going to
home.
say,
No-
Councillor Mashish has 30 seconds. If we can speed
Right.
this up.
So I'll say very quickly,
That's okay,
we're
thank
not
you.
restricting anyone to have access to their homes. That everyone can drive there, no problem. And there are people who will have access to the homes, and there's no issues with that, depending on the route they take, and they may have to change the route that they take. But with the white list increasing, so a lot of those issues have been dissipated anyway. But I'll let you can answer.
Jefferson.
Thank you, Councillor Mushiso. If your question is, if someone books an Uber, how do they get an Uber? Or if their relatives want to visit them, how do they get there? I can assure you, we're not banning cars. No, are we banning road? Are we blocking roads? Roads are still there. All we're saying is travel differently. Our transport policy is very clear, is to create safer and more attractive spaces for walking and cycling, and to reduce through traffic on residential roads. That is not possible to do without, unfortunately, meaning that people have to travel differently. We're not saying don't drive a car. If you must drive a car, then you have to drive it through a different route. So people can still visit their relatives, I can assure you.
Councillor Mashish, what are you indicating?
I've got 30 seconds, as you said,
Yeah.
but I wanted to clarify a bit more, because some businesses, their business is to drive. So, and some families need to drive to get to their relatives, and they're coming from outside of Chiswick, and they're picking up fines en route, whichever route they pick. I've looked at the map, and if you look at that map again and see where the different LTNs and street space programs are, there is almost nowhere we can go where you can't get a fine. So I just want you to clarify that.
That's not true.
And could I, Chair, if I may, I want to extend that same question to the gentleman who called in this decision as well. So I want to hear their view, so that the panel can take a view on that.
Are you going to answer Councillor Khan or Councillor Dunn?
Well, Jefferson and Councillor Dunn can answer, but it's not true to say that you can't access your home or visit someone without getting a fine. In Chiswick, it's not. It's not. You find a route which is you follow the enforcement procedures, and you will not get a fine. I can't control Google. Sorry.
Jefferson.
Thank you, Councillor Mushiso. And I think it's worth noting that there will be some inconvenience caused. I don't think it's possible to introduce any kind of change, unfortunately, without a degree of people doing things differently, perhaps differently from how they're used to doing things. And that means traveling differently. I appreciate the point you make, Councillor Mushiso, around sat-navs. And I think that's probably the next challenge for highway engineers like myself, is how do we ensure that our schemes connect to the digital space? Because in many cases, as we've seen on a number of our schemes, we make the traffic order, we put up the sign, but people are no longer looking at signs anymore. They're looking at their sat-navs. But that is way beyond our control. There's nothing we can. I wish I could speak to Google and get them to listen to us and obey our traffic orders. But at the moment, that is beyond our control. We cannot do that. These things work based on algorithms. So no matter what the traffic order says, if enough people drive through it, it will send people down there. That's just how it works, unfortunately. So whilst we have control over making traffic orders and designing schemes, we don't have control over the digital space.
Thank you, Jefferson. I'm going to ask Councillor Dunn and then Councillor Hearn.
I don't think I have anything to add.
That's
really.
fine. That's fine, Councillor Dunn. Councillor Hearn.
I often tell Labour colleagues that unlike in the rest of the borough, in Chiswick, they find the most inarticulate and stupid people and they elect them as councillors. So this, in fact, this whole scheme is a huge compliment to the intelligence of the people who live in my ward. This is the most complicated scheme that's been imposed. It was originally, and then they've made it more complicated. And now this evening, they've made it more complicated still. And there are some very confused elderly people who do really not know what to say to their carers, to their children, to delivery drivers, whatever. But can I say the taxi driver issue is a real problem. These are situations which actually arise. Taxi drivers will not pick up late at night because they're afraid of coming in. And this affects, I mean, obviously, big chunky men like me, we can walk a couple of miles if we have to. But for women, it's a problem. And we have a whole string of pubs, we have restaurants, and you would think you could come out of the pub and order a taxi, wouldn't you? But they are deliberately not coming in. Yes, there is nothing that we can do about this. We don't control Google, but we do control this scheme. You know, it's like we can't control the fact there's a River Thames and there's a couple of bridges. We can't control that, but we have to take that into account when we design these schemes. And it's like the disabled thing. It's, oh, well, these pregnant women, we can send them on cycling courses. I mean, it's...
Excuse me, sorry, Chair. Has anyone said that any of us here sitting here today sending a pregnant woman to go cycling?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Who?
Yes, you did. I can quote you.
Did I say that?
You said it, yeah.
It's in the report.
No, but did I say that?
Yeah.
Look, it's in the report.
Okay, thank you. Let's just leave it there. Councillor Foot, do you have some questions? Finally. Thought we'd never get here.
Sorry, my apologies. Yeah, I'm going to keep it short because, as I say, many of the questions that I would have asked have already been asked. Can I just confirm with you that the process of consultation is going to run parallel with a temporary live procedure? So that is a live procedure that can be withdrawn, but that's when the consultation is taking place. Is that right?
Absolutely correct.
Okay, just so as I know. You also quoted some numbers. I mean, I live in Hamworth, and the Great Chertsey Road, the A316, actually starts in Hamworth. So I'm very familiar with it and travelled up it towards London. And I know that, yes, the major problem is the Hogarth roundabout. I can assure you I've never run the rat run across that particular estate to try and avoid it. I might have done others elsewhere, but not there. But there's no doubt about it that there are people who are using these roads as a rat run, and people who are coming up from the outside of London, coming up on the M3 onto the Great Chertsey Road, and using that to sidestep the Hogarth roundabout, which is, it's not particularly a good place. I agree. With a temporary over. I mean, I keep thinking every time I go on that over arch there that it's likely to fall down underneath me. It always feels like it's likely to fall down underneath me. So anyway, that's that part. Can I just ask you? I mean, we've heard about individuals, and we know about individuals that have problems. Sometimes people talk about them in mass numbers, and that doesn't help, because people with individual problems need individual answers, and mass answers don't help. Is there a scheme whereby we can actually look at the way this scheme is affecting individuals who either are suffering as invalids that have disabilities, or are in any way ill because of, that enables them or does not enable them to actually go by. Is there a way in which there is anybody out there that is actually tacking onto this and talking to people? Because I've not heard that so far.
Jefferson, are you taking that answer? Or, yep.
Yes. Thank you, Councillor Foot. If the question is around how we're engaging with residents while these schemes are live, the consultation we did during these schemes, the street space schemes, received 9,900 responses. So people fed back to us what their experiences were, and in some cases, in particular, on Devonshire Road and Tottenham Terrace, we made amendments to Devonshire Road based on feedback we received from both businesses as well as disabled people who simply didn't have places to park when they went to shop, because some of the parking places were suspended. On Tottenham Green Terrace, we had to make provision as well for disabled parking bays, because again, based on feedback we received that the scheme was affecting disabled people disproportionately due to lack of parking. So we have had some feedback. Going forward, what we intend to do, and again, this has to be viewed in the context of these schemes being introduced during the pandemic. Now that we are hopefully heading towards out of the pandemic, what we intend to do is that when we introduce these schemes, we have better engagement forums where we engage people throughout, not just based on submitting questionnaires, actually having town hall conversations with people throughout the life of these schemes, talking to businesses a lot more.
Excuse me, please. We're trying to have a meeting without any interruptions, please. You can't hear what you're saying. Sorry, can you speak a bit louder, please, Jefferson?
Okay, I'm
as
sorry.
loud as you can.
I don't have a very loud voice, I'm afraid. So going forward, we intend to have a much more intensive engagement program when these schemes are live, both pre-implementation, implementation, and prior to making decisions. But in fairness, throughout the schemes, we did engage, and we got huge responses. You don't get 9,900 responses from people if you don't engage.
And what did they say? I'm sorry, through the chair. What did they say, Jefferson?
As made very clear in the report, there was overwhelming, a significant level of opposition to these schemes, but it's not a referendum. We make decisions. Based.
Chair, I'm asking the questions. Could I ask Sam not to hijack my questions? Because I will answer.
My apologies, Councillor Foot. I thought there was needed for clarity, but I apologise.
No, I'm still waiting. I'll come back and ask for my clarity when I need it, which I probably do.
So yes, that's our plan. Is going forward, we'll have much more interactive engagement sessions. For me, I think that's far more important than just having questionnaires. So that's an area where I think we can make improvements going forward. But during the life of these schemes, we engaged as much as we could, hence the responses we received.
Yeah, I think that what I was saying was that consultations are not the way to get it down to the finer point with individuals with problems. And it's that bit that worries me, is whether or not we're able to getting down to individuals and finding out, is there things that we need a light touch on to alleviate those problems that individuals have got. I mean, I'm not unfamiliar with this. I mean, ironically, last week my son borrowed my car and drove from my house in Hamworth to Fulwell and managed to drive up a road that Richmond Council have now made one way and traffic controlled, and I got a £65 fine. So it's one of those things. It's not just Hounslow that's doing it; it's all over London that's doing it. Anyway,
Have you got another question after Councillor Foot?
Yeah. Sorry, no, I think it's really getting down to the nitty gritty of being able to ask and alleviate the problems that individuals have got, and they are personal. I'm a blue badge holder. I don't consider myself to be seriously disabled, but I do have problems walking any distance. But it's a problem that's personal to me. It's my My problem is the one I have, and it's different to, say, the problem of somebody else in the room. So it's really getting down to that level. How are we going to get down to that level to help out in those areas?
Thank you, Councillor Foote. And we have already demonstrated that we are willing to do that level of engagement, that very granular level of engagement. We are already doing that on Cycleway 9, which we are running a pre-engagement exercise, which concluded, which we'll be reporting on very soon, where we've gone down to different equalities groups to understand how the proposals would impact them. I intend going forward that we do that on all our schemes, where we, rather than just simply asking people to submit questionnaires, we'll go down to as granular a level as possible, be that through town hall meetings, be that through one-to-one sessions with particular groups, and also even if site visits as well, which we've also carried out as part of the C9 pre-engagement.
Councillor Todd, I know you want to say something. I just want to say, Councillor Dunn, did you want to say something in reply to that? Okay, then we'll come to Councillor Todd.
Yeah, just briefly to say that actually, that is the point of consultations. Although it is to pick up on issues that might affect individuals or communities that might not have been considered, to consider other suggestions that might come up through the consultation, actually to look at that granular response that Jefferson was talking about. It's not to carry out a vote. And so, because we know that as Councillor Biddulph frequently pointed out, this isn't these aren't surveys that are statistically weighted and relevant. They are actually just there to find out what people's opinions and what the issues are, and see if there's anything that hasn't been considered. And where partly because we can't control who responds to them, and because they're not weighted in the way that proper polls and surveys can be. And where those types of polls have been carried out, we know that people are generally in favour of this type of measures.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Thank you. I've asked the audience please not to interrupt. Thank you. Councillor Todd.
That's very kind. I just want to add a rider to Jefferson's answer to excellent question from Councillor Foote. What's so important about this particular document, Councillor Foote, is the huge decisions within. These barriers will ever be there forever and ever, ever. They're major decisions, and there are flaws in that document which you skillfully pulled out. Would you go ahead on the basis of what you heard? And I think the answer is a reluctant no. Thank you.
That's the point that I was asking. I mean, Councillor Todd saying one thing which is totally contrary to what was being said by on the outside, that this decision is in there forever and a day. My first question was, are these in there, or are they temporary procedures that are in place whilst the consultations are running parallel to them? And I was told yes. You're saying no.
Yes, you can, Councillor Todd. Yeah. And then
I'm very keen not to mislead you. We're both different wards, Councillor Foote. The two schemes, the school scheme I alluded to, is a fresh scheme. It's a fresh scheme, so it's not being signed off. It'll be reviewed after 6 months with a consultation. The other schemes, sorry, if you don't mind me answering, have gone through a process, and this signs them off as permanent schemes. That's my understanding.
Can you answer that?
Yes,
because, I'm somewhere along the line here. I'm being misled.
No, not at all. You're not being misled at all. I can assure you, Councillor Foote. So, looking at the map, the two measures, and you see the purple, or rather pink. Sorry, I might be colorblind. I'm not quite sure which it is. Arrow,
Yeah,
and there's
I can't
also
do that, so I've got a crick in my neck, so I have to look at. this screen down here.
There's also another arrow, a light blue arrow, which shows a restriction at Burlington Lane.
Yes,
So
I see
those two specific measures are new. So those are experimental measures. We're introducing them as experiments, and we'll monitor them over the course of the next 6 months at least. So those are schemes that we may decide at the end of the 6-month period to reverse. So those are experimental measures. The schemes that Councillor Todd is referring to are the schemes that have been made permanent, that were introduced in 2020. So they've been in place.
So
they've
where
been
are they in here?
The first one I can. So there's a restriction. So there's. Oh, very good. You can do that for me. So there's a restriction right there at the junction with. Sorry, if you can zoom into it, please.
Could you turn the microphone on right by you?
The one on the desk. Hold it in your hand.
Pick it up. Yeah. So there's a restriction. If you can zoom in, please. More, please. Okay, right. So at this, just right there, there's a restriction there, which I think this would actually be better if you show the third slide, technical findings, and go straight to. If you can go straight to the last slide, please. Right. So you can see there's a restriction here. So this is the barrier that Councillor Todd was referring to. That barrier stops through traffic from traveling from the A316 all the way through to the A4. As you will see, there's been an 83% reduction in traffic on that particular section. So that's the barrier. That was introduced.
Please don't interrupt.
That was introduced in 2020. So it's not a new scheme.
So we're not discussing that here tonight.
That scheme is not new. That scheme is not new. It was already introduced in 2020, and the decision this time was to make it permanent. The two schemes that are new are the schemes at this point on Staveley Road and Burlington Lane Junction with the A316.
Right. So we're not discussing that permanent area. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to him.
Excuse me, please, would the audience not comment or interrupt? I've asked you a couple of times already this evening.
Clear the room, I think.
So the objection, it would seem that the objection on the calling relates not only to the new experimental measures that we've just announced that haven't even been implemented, as well as the schemes that were implemented last year, which evidently, as you can see from this data, has reduced traffic significantly all over the place, all over the South Chiswick area. You can see the figures. This is based on traffic analysis. So the objection is not only for the new measures that haven't even come into effect, haven't been implemented, but also the schemes that have been in place for which we have data that shows that they have clearly worked.
Okay.
Excuse me, I understand that all of you here watching tonight have a vested interest, but it's a very complicated thing we're looking at tonight, so we really need to be able to concentrate, and comments really don't help, or disturbances. I appreciate you're all here because you're very passionate about it, but please try to be understanding towards us. Otherwise, I will have to ask you to leave the room, and I don't want to do that. Thank you.
Right. Sorry, I got distracted then. So, I mean, now, what we're talking about, and that has been amended on a meeting with Councillor Hearn and Councillor Todd on Monday, has
on which
been
we were briefed.
can I finish?
Sure.
Has then been discussed between them, and set out as a press report released tonight, and then told to us when we sat down, which I'm really very, very disappointed about. You know, that we should be the last to know that there's been changes. I still don't know what actually agreements have been reached with the councillors in those wards about these amendments to these schemes.
Jefferson.
Thank you, Councillor Foot. Please, can we go to the original scheme, please? So the issue that Councillor Todd and Councillor Hearn discussed with Councillor Khan and I relates to the exemption area. So everywhere, the section in blue, the area encircled and triangulated in blue, is exempt. So everybody who lives there is exempt from this particular restriction. So the Staveley Road restriction exempts everybody who lives within, these are two CPZs, so the Falkenberg Road and Grove Park control parking zones. The question or the contention or the issue that Councillor Todd had with this scheme was that his area, his ward, had been excluded, and they were reliant, or his ward is reliant on a number of amenities, be it GP surgery, shops, a train station, etc., on this particular section of Grove Park. And the discussion, following discussions with Councillor Khan and I on Monday, we agreed that we would extend the exemption area to include all the areas to the east of the A316. So if you go into the amended scheme, you will see that that's the A316. The blue area has now increased to capture all the areas within, most of the areas within Councillor Todd's ward. So that's the main change. These people to this east of the A316 wouldn't have had access through this scheme during the operating hours under the original scheme. We've simply extended it to now allow everyone who lives on these streets, on these roads down here, to be able to access the Staveley Road restriction unfettered.
Assuming they've got their car registered for the cameras.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's not totally unfettered. So what process do they have to go through to get these your cars?
So subject to the outcome of tonight's calling, if the decision stands, then we will set up a registration scheme, and residents will be notified to register on a scheme. So there'll be a registration scheme set up.
This is online?
Yes, it will be online, yes.
On the council?
Yes.
Website?
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Foot. Is that okay? You done? Okay. Councillor Todd, you wanted to say something quickly, and then we'll get to the next part of this process.
I'll be very quick. It's correct. We did have a meeting with Councillor Handiford. They were very grateful. They made an offer. We didn't accept it. We went away to think about it. After the meeting, I wrote to him saying the boundary at the top of that map is inadequate. It doesn't cover the convent, or I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about the hours of operation. So there was no sign off on our part, but it was very helpful to have that meeting and the unqualified contribution.
Thank you for the clarity, Councillor Todd. Right, we are finished with the questions for now. So we're going to go to the next part of the process, which hopefully will not take quite as long, but it may well do. And I would just like each of the committee members to express an opinion about what they think of the call-in. Thank you. We'll start with Councillor Akanzada, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think there are issues which need to be addressed. And no doubt that this is a very complex plan. But just to cut it short, I think that need to be more consultation. And I would say that the matter should be referred back to the Cabinet.
Thank you. Councillor Lal.
Chair, I've been listening very, very carefully to the discussion taking place this evening, and I'm also mindful of the fact that I must apologize to the people who actually reached out to me and gave me their rationale for or against these proposals. It wasn't possible to cover every single question and issue that they had raised with me during this discussion, but it still has given me some kind of an inkling of where I want to go with this. And And to help me focus my mind a little bit, I picked up on page 10, bullet point 11.1, the consideration of all call-in requests to help ensure good cabinet decisions relates to council's priority to create an ambitious council which improves the lives of residents and works in a transparent way. And the focus here is on improving the lives of residents and works in a transparent way. Unfortunately, the speed at which this particular project occurred, perhaps it was the fault of the Secretary of State for really, pushing us to get on with it. I don't know, but we are where we are. But I think that was probably one of the underlying issues that probably had a domino effect to get us to where we are. And having heard the officers' representation and Councillor Khan's representations this evening, quite clearly, they're mindful of the fact that schemes do need to be tweaked, and in an ideal world, they would have probably conducted the exercise a little bit differently, and they're hoping to conduct it differently in the future. But we are where we are with this scheme, and the answer so far no way addresses the concerns that were given to me by members, by residents, which I skimmed through. So, bearing that in mind, I also need to refer to the report by the consultant Steer. I don't think we talked about it in great deal this evening, but again, there were words that were in that report, inferences and insights, and which were very, very weak. And again, we've already alluded to the fact that the data was the data what it was, and we had to get on with it. And again, perhaps in an ideal world, that report by Steer would have been not considered as highly as it had to be considered in this case. And a lot of emphasis was given on it. In terms to consultation activity, air quality, traffic analysis, etc. All right, but it was weak. So I'm also minded to give the cabinet another opportunity to consider comments from the panel, to perhaps have an open mind. We are where we are, but clearly this project has caused a lot of stress and anxiety and misery for the residents. Yes, it's something that we want to move ahead with in terms of air quality, etc., traffic reduction, but it has caused too much grief. And where it improves the lives of residents, I feel it falls short, and therefore I'm minded also to refer this back to the Cabinet for review.
Thank you, Councillor Lal. Councillor Mashisha.
Thank you, Chair. Like Councillor Sam Hearn said in his opening remarks, we've made a very complicated scheme even more complicated. We've had thousands of emails, and Councillor Lau says he's had some for and against. Unfortunately, I've had all against, none for, but but I accept you maybe have received a few that were for. Yeah. And I also feel sorry for some of our councillors that perhaps not had experience of the constant emails that we've had for the last 18 months in the east of the borough. So I can't stand here and say, well, you're not getting it as bad as we are. And to quote Councillor Bidoff, it is coming for you. It's coming to your ward, and you will be getting this if we don't make a stand against this as a panel. Some of the emails we've had, and we've seen some of the protesters outside and some members of the public who are here today, they've given up their time to be here. It's not because they can, but it's because they must. This means a lot to them. And we're supposed to be listening to our residents. We're supposed to be a listening borough, but clearly we're not. If this does not help our panel make a decision, then I don't know what will. And I'm delighted that the first two speakers here are in agreement that this should refer back to the cabinet, because I think we are being undermined, and there's a quote from, I think, the officer who said that, let me see where he said, oh yeah, something along the lines of, you know, this is not a referendum. It is not a referendum. I agree with you. We are a representative democracy. I'm here and we're here to represent views of our residents. And the views of the residents are that they are against these schemes in many of the areas you're looking at that we're referring to tonight. And I'm glad that we are acting as one here tonight as Overview and Scrutiny. I've been one of the biggest critics of the Overview and Scrutiny because I just think we've been many times just a rubber stamping exercise for the cabinet. But on this occasion, I hope that you can see that with the residents here and the ones outside protesting, that this means something to them. They just haven't come up here just for the sake of it. They've come here because it matters. We have to review these schemes again. We cannot be rushed. Yes, I think we've been rushed by central government, but we have authority as a local authority to make our own decisions. We should not be dictated to by central government, whichever party it is. We are local representatives and we can make adjustments based on what we see. And I'm delighted that we're on the same hymn sheet. Obviously, there's only been 3 of us spoken so far out of 5. But so far, it looks like a majority that we want this to be referred back to Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mishisho. Councillor Foot.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I have really divided up my comments into 3. I believe that the process of consultation in a temporary live procedure is a good process. I think it means taking an opinion or forming an opinion from an actual situation, and I think that's to be congratulated. I also believe that it's vitally important to stop the rat race that takes place up through these estates, not just here, but in other parts of the borough as well, in this particular place, in order to avoid the Hogarth roundabout. My third point is one where I am uneasy. I hadn't actually was going to say refer back, but much of my worries comes to the same conclusion, even if I would have expressed it differently. But I think there is quite a lot missing here about the way in which we can help those people, that quite a large proportion of people as well, that are affected by this. And we don't seem to be managing to combat that. And I think that under those circumstances, I would support a referral back to Cabinet.
Thank you all. I would like to add that I don't drive. So I have, over the last 3 to 4 weeks, spent many a trip to Chiswick with various friends who have driven me and asked for their opinions. Unfortunately, many of them I can't repeat here today. The council has a policy, and what their idea is great, but definitely some of these things need to be re-looked at. We definitely need to have more consultation. So I'm also in agreement with the rest of the committee. I will just ask Councillor Foot if you'd like to propose a motion for us now, and then we can second that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I propose the motion that this be referred back to Cabinet to look at the areas of where it's affecting individuals on this estate or in those areas, and to look again at that particular point.
Does anybody want to second that?
I'll second that.
Okay. Can we have a vote, please? Those in favour? Agreed. Okay, so we are All in favour of that. What I would like to suggest is that we are now going to have the second part of the process this evening, but would everybody like perhaps a 5-minute comfort break, as it's been quite a long evening all so far? Or do you just want to carry on? Okay. And we're going to suspend standing orders. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Does everybody want a 5-minute comfort break? Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Chair, Chair,
Yes,
do you need us,
Councillor Cohen.
do you need us to remain for the second part?
No, I suppose you don't really need to remain. Thank you. Thank you for your time, all of you, this evening.
Thank you, Chair.
I'd like, it's 9:20. If everybody's back by 9:30, is that okay? That's more than 5 minutes. It's 10.
What's the second part of our agenda then?
Okay, excuse me. Some of you are going to leave the room, but some of you are not. So I just need to clarify something for you. What we are going to do now in the second part is that we are going to be making some recommendations, which will be given to the Cabinet. Okay? Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I know I'm going to have to go and wash my hands. Oh.
Brilliant. Excuse me, is everybody ready to continue, please? Okay. Excuse me, are we all ready to commence? Thank you. Thank you all. It's been a long evening, but we're almost at the end. This is now the part of the evening where we make some recommendations. So I would like to ask each one of the committee members if, what recommendations they wish to make and on what basis. Thank you. Sorry, and please remember the reasons for calling from the Constitution, please.
Thank you, Chair. My basically almost three recommendation that I would like to be consider while the cabinet is looking into it. That the consultation process need to be more fair and inclusive, so that we can include everyone and get more precise feedback from our resident. The data which we have seen in this report is not that that we can do the comparisons, or it's not accurate that the decision can be based on. So the data can be improved, and the most important thing is which Councillor Richard Foote have referred to earlier, that the people who are individually, if they have any issue, especially if they have any disability or any personal issues, so we need to take them into account, so as it is not a breach of their human rights.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lal.
Chair, once again, I think we've covered a lot of ground this evening, and although not all the questions that I had outlined were asked, but I think we got to the substance of the issue at hand, and I have no hesitation to concur with Councillor Akhundzada that I believe that listening to the officers and also the representations made by members of the public, that the consultation could have been better conducted. The other thing I felt when I talked about air quality and traffic issues, etc., I do believe that the data should support the decision-making process. And there again, I think the data could have been a lot stronger, and that needs to be rectified.
Thank you. Councillor Mashisho.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with my two colleagues on the panel so far on this about the full consultation being inclusive to take into account all these groups, especially the groups that are vulnerable that we've put in our recommendation process here. But I also like to in our recommendations is we need to review some of the barriers that are also within these schemes, the physical barriers, and take in the costings of putting those barriers up and permanently, because I think that's something that hasn't been covered. I'm referring to Staveley Road and well, both barriers in Riverside. On my second point, so my third point is to do with representation of the groups. So I'm talking about there's a number of groups in the wards concerned with this call-in who feel they have not been engaged with the process. And I think that further to that point about consultation is we need to get those 4 groups or 5 groups at the table so that we can fully understand what the implications are and what suggestions and what alternatives they may have to put forward. And on the same token on that, perhaps I would also ask, what other alternatives has the cabinet have in view of what they're looking to do, which is create more space for cycling and walking? What other alternatives? Is it just closure of roads? That is the alternative to getting to this project, or are there other alternatives that have been looked at all? And my final point is perhaps more telling, which is that I understand that the local government ombudsman is aware of some of these meetings and some of the goings on in the last few weeks, and I think that as courtesy, we need to hear what his comments may be before we publish the recommendation, or before we fully get the decision from cabinet. So we need to be able to understand from the advice of the local government ombudsman, who is, and hear his or her comments before cabinet makes a decision here. So it's quite full, but I think the 4 points I want to talk about, which is consultation, alternative plans, representation of the group, and an acknowledgement of the fact that local government ombudsmen are already aware of activities, and we need to hear their comments on this.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mishisho. Councillor Foote.
My apologies. Yeah, my apologies to Councillor Mishisho. My shorthand is not that great to have taken down all the notes about what you've just said, but I try and capture what I can in short.
It is all been minuted, so.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I'm also looking at, I think, in terms of reasons for the call-in, the inadequate consultation with stakeholders and prior to decisions. I'm not saying that in capital letters, but I think that it's important that we note that it did leave a lot to be desired, the consultation. And I think that needs to be made there. I've made my point about the areas that, I mean, that are the two main areas that are there, that we've got something that's temporary, that consultation can take place around that something that's temporary, because it can be removed. And I think that is a reasonable way to go into consultation around that. That's my personal opinion. I am concerned about the rat run.
Yeah,
I've seen it on many occasions over the years, not just there, but in many other places. And its vehicles, and I mean, certainly, going way back, before we had the problem of going into central London. But I mean, in those days, people used to whip around Chelsea and everything along the embankment and so on to try and get into central London and round through residential roads that sort of took you around there. And I was guilty of that as much as anybody, just to get to Westminster. Sorry? No. But, it was something that, that's been there, and they are a problem. And I know that living even in Hamworth, we see roads that are used in that way. We suffer in Hamworth from the roads coming from Hampton, from the schools. When you see a dozen double-decker buses with 4 students on each coming down Hampton Lane, one after the other, and you're sitting there waiting for them, it becomes quite a problem. So it's not a problem that's just around here. That it's a problem all over. Have I
just like to say all the councillors in Riverside would agree completely with you. We all completely accept and understand their rat running problem, and that's why we engaged originally when the money first came out of TfL. What happened after COVID was they cut the consultation process that was in place. They cut that, and they went and said, "This is what we want to do."
Okay, well, we're now moving on, Sam. So
right, I'm saying we understand that problem. We want a way to solve the rat
It wasn't a
run.
criticism of anybody that I was saying it. I was saying it's what I recognise.
No, I'm saying we agree with you.
Yeah.
We must deal with the problem. Whatever we end up with must deal with that problem.
So anyway, taking on to that, then I think that my final point was the one that I made here, that I felt that consultation was too much of a broad issue. It really didn't get to the real problem, and the real problems are those that are suffered by individuals, and there is nothing in here that seems to cope with that. And I think that is the main message I would like to see to go back to Cabinet, that they need to devise a scheme whereby individuals can feel that they are a part and parcel of the solution, not just a part and parcel of the problem.
Are you going to make a motion, Councillor
Yeah,
Fulton? Shall we? Yeah.
I was trying to think and
Yeah,
listen.
I
and
know,
write
it's a
at the
bit
same
hard at
time.
the end, I know. It's all a bit
I'm
much.
quite happy to take some advice, but basically I was saying that, consultation, I'm trying to read my own writing, more fair and inclusive, and could have been a lot better. I think that was comment saying we need improvement of data. Data did not support all of the processes. And then taking into account the individual disabilities and issues which examined in depth. I don't know if there's anything else anybody wants to add to that.
I think we've covered most of it.
Yeah, just a
Sorry,
comment.
Councillor Mashisha, yeah.
It's just a comment. Obviously, some of us I've been on this overview and scrutiny since election 2018. And I just wanted to check perhaps with even the legal proceedings on this. If a recommendation goes to Cabinet, could you just put in record exactly how that happens? I know Councillor Richard Foote explained to me off the record how it happened, but can you just put on record what the procedures are after this?
Cabinet will look at the recommendations or look at the matters that have been referred back by the subcommittee and can decide that the decision should stand and can be implemented, or they can decide to change the decision in part or in full and not to implement it. But they're under no obligation to do so. It's at their discretion.
Is that okay, Councillor Mashisha? Okay, good, thank you. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Foote's motion?
I'll second that.
Thank you. And we should still have a vote, so are we all in favour? Agreed? Okay, then that's a unanimous vote, unanimous decision.
Chair, it might help if the motion referred to the grounds on which you're referring it back.
Okay.
So you could say that you're referring it back on the basis of inadequate consultation with stakeholders prior to decisions.
I was just going to.
No,
No, it's fine. Actually, I was going to, but you can.
Yeah. So and that can include that it wasn't fair and inclusive. Vulnerable groups weren't consulted. Not all stakeholders were consulted, and it was otherwise inadequate. And I think the second key ground for the referral back is the absence of evidence on which to base the decision. So the references to the poor quality data, the data not being accurate and not supporting the decisions that have been made. And I don't think you're saying anything's contrary to the policy framework.
Yeah.
Are you?
Yeah.
I'm not sure the equalities is part of the policy framework. That's more a human rights issue, but that's not a ground for call-in at the moment.
I thought this was one of the reasons that we were given for the call-in request. Must be a potential human rights challenge, which would include the equalities.
Yeah, but I suppose we can decide to say that there's a concern about individual. Individuals haven't been adequately consulted. The impact on potentially vulnerable people hasn't been adequately considered.
Yes. Yeah.
and I think that's what I've picked up. So.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, that this was really based on, here it says on point 45.23, that the matter should be referred back to the decision taker, i.e. the portfolio holder, executive or joint committee. And the reasons, as I say, I have just jotted them down, was based on the following constitutional reasons: the inadequate consultation, the absence of adequate evidence, and again, I had put down the potential human rights challenge. I guess that concludes that. We haven't quite finished the meeting. I would just like to say I hope that this proves that we are not a committee that simply rubber stamps, but that we do listen to the voices of our residents. And I think if the Chiswick residents always feel as if, we're slightly against them. Very far from it. Tonight we proved that we have, all of us, worked well together and unanimously support you all. So thank you. Before I say goodnight and allow you all to leave, I didn't do the minutes at the beginning of the meeting, as I just wanted to get straight into the nitty-gritty of this meeting. So I'd just like to, could everybody just have a look at the minutes, please, of the last meeting, which was on the 4th of August, if there's anything that we need to clear. Yeah, is that agreed, everybody?
Agreed.
Agreed, thank you. Any other, that I have no matters that I consider urgent? Anybody else? Okay, thank you all for attending. Thank you for your patience. It's been a long evening, but I hope you're all happy, or at least content somewhat with the outcome. Thank you and good night.
Just want to say thank you, Chair. Yes, I do now have a bit of hope that you are, as a council, we are listening to the whole of the borough. So thank you for giving us that hope.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Councillor Mishisho. Thank you all.
Yeah, and thanks God that is also now part of the record.
Yeah.
That we have admitted that.
Please make sure that's minuted.